Thank you, Deputy Speaker. In rising to support this bill, I want to acknowledge the deep pain and hurt of members of my own community. This legislation seeks to right an historic wrong that affected people and communities across Australia, including in my own. These are people who have already suffered too much, victims, survivors of child sexual abuse. This legislation follows a fundamental principle that perpetrators of child sexual abuse should not be able to hide from accountability. Trauma does not end when the abuse ends. For many survivors, it is something that they must navigate every day, too often in silence and without adequate support. Some survivors face barriers to stable employment and financial security, meaning the harm they experience is not only emotional and psychological, but also material. Our compensation legislation should support victims and victim survivors. Under these reforms, where a court-ordered compensation debt remains unpaid after 12 months, victims and survivors will be able to seek access through a court order to certain superannuation contributions made by the offender. This includes additional personal and salary sacrifice contributions, which have previously been used as a vehicle to shield assets from enforcement. An important component of this schedule ensures that compensation debts do not disappear through bankruptcy. By allowing these debts to survive bankruptcy proceedings, we are reinforcing a clear and necessary message. Financial manoeuvring must not override moral and legal responsibility. Bankruptcy should not be a refuge from accountability for serious harm. A 2019 Deloitte study estimated that violence against children and young people cost $11.2 billion in New South Wales alone. This legislation is deeply personal to many people in my electorate. I have heard their stories and have been moved by their courage. The passage of this bill is the culmination of a sustained and honourable campaign by a dedicated collection of people in my electorate of Eden-Monaro. Everyone in the Bega Valley was shaken by the crimes committed by Morris Van Ryn, who was convicted of abusing 9 children between 2003 and 2014. Van Ryn was also later convicted of abusing a 10th child in 2019. In 2023, the Supreme Court of New South Wales awarded the 10th victim, Eden Van Haren, $1.4 million in damages for the abuse he endured. Van Ryn then declared bankruptcy in December 2023. Under the existing laws, this would extinguish his debt and deny victim survivors justice. This legal escape clause allowed Van Ryn's abuse of Eden to continue by hiding his superannuation against the compensation he owed to his victims. When I was first elected as the member for Eden-Monaro in 2020, the campaigners for this change in my community came to me and explained the work that had already been done. I was moved enough to use my privileged position to take up this cause. I want to thank Attorney General Michelle Rowland and Assistant Treasurer Dan Molino, who have worked tirelessly to deliver this life-changing reform for victim survivors. These new laws will close a deeply unjust loophole and give victim survivors access to compensation they are owed. I want to extend my genuine gratitude and admiration to victim survivors like Eden Van Haren for their bravery to sustain this campaign and push the government to make our laws fairer for victims. For Eden, this took countless meetings with the Assistant Treasurer and the Attorney General to iron out the specific ways this reform could be implemented, that could stand against challenge and pass through the Parliament as quickly as possible after introduction. Other campaigners that I would like to thank for their sustained efforts include Nicholas Kavanagh, who was another victim of Morris Van Ryn, Eden's grandmother, Carolyn Kelly, who is a solicitor on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, David Neal, a Super for Survivors campaigner and local community advocate from the Bega Valley, Andrew Carpenter, partner at Webster's Lawyers, Fighters Against Child Abuse Australia founder Adam Washbourne, abuse survivor, actor and advocate Madeline West, and all the campaigners from the Super for Survivors campaign. In preparation for delivering this speech, Eden asked me to say this. I know there is a lot of anger around this topic of survivors, and everyone wants to get revenge on these monsters and make them pay. And I've been angry, so bloody angry, wishing I could just start life over again, wishing I could make this insidious pain and struggle I deal with every day just disappear. But that's not what this is about. This is about all of us. This is about Australia. This is about the absolutely monumental effect the cause of child sexual abuse has on every aspect of Australian life. The sheer number of people who contact me to share their story every day, my heart tearing just a little bit more. We should not have had to spend our lives suffering because of a decision adults made towards us as innocent children. We need a change. We need to heal. Australia needs to heal. So I beg you, please help us heal. Please help us heal at the expense of the responsible party, not at the expense of the rest of Australia. No more hiding money in super, and absolutely no more to allowing bankruptcy to be used to clear the pain caused by this disgusting behaviour. Super for Survivors campaigner and local Bega community advocate David Neal also asked me to relay his words. I started this campaign in 2017 after recognising that perpetrators of child sex offences were able to weaponise the existing legal system and use it against victims who dared to seek civil compensation for the harm done to them. With the passing of this bill, we can bring this abhorrent practice to an end. As one victim survivor of Morris Van Ryn said after witnessing this bill presented to Parliament in March 2026, we have taken back the power from this monster. I also would like to thank local media, with particular reference to Bega District News, Power FM, ABC Southeast, A Current Affair and Region Media, for continuing to shine a light on this issue and ensuring it did not leave the agenda of government. As a parliament, we must recognise that the impacts of child sexual abuse are enduring, complex and profound, and that our response must be equally serious, sustained and centred on those who have been harmed. For too many survivors, a court ruling in their favour has not translated into real-world outcomes. They have endured the trauma of legal proceedings, only to face further distress when compensation orders go unpaid, compounding the harm. When survivors tell us that the system still falls short, it is our responsibility to listen. It is important to remember the voices that we do not hear. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, only a third of sexual assaults are reported to police. Making sure our legislation remains fit for purpose and meets the expectations of community is critical, which is why reviewing this measure after its implementation is also essential. This will ensure that Parliament does not simply pass legislation and move on, but remains engaged with how those reforms are working in practice. It provides an opportunity to assess whether victims and survivors are benefiting and whether additional changes are required. This reform is about righting wrongs, restoring fairness and ensuring accountability in our legal system. I am proud to be part of a government that has delivered this reform. I'll continue to support victim survivors and advocate on behalf of our community, and I am really proud that this Parliament will come together over this bill, and I proudly commend the legislation to the House.